Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our fourth COVID-19 Town Hall, Fraud Prevention, Education, and Enforcement Efforts. Before we get started, we'd like to run through a few housekeeping items so you all know how to participate in today's event. First, all lines are on mute. If you have a question, you will have the opportunity to text them into today's presenters. Please type in your thoughts into the question pane of the control panel. You may send them in at any time during the presentation. We will collect these and address them throughout the session. Similar questions will be combined, and inappropriate or offensive questions will not be announced. Due to time constraints, please keep all questions on topic. If you experience any technical difficulties at any point during our presentation, please explain your problem through the chat feature, and we will try our best to address the issue. Lastly, we are recording this town hall, and the video will be available on our YouTube page within 24 hours. Please subscribe to New Jersey OAG on YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and Flickr for the latest updates on information, resources, and news from the office. Now I'd like to hand things off to our host and moderator, Attorney General Kabir Grewal.
Thanks, Whitney, and I want to welcome everyone to our fourth virtual town hall, which is part of our 2121 project. 2121 stands for 21 Counties, 21st Century Policing. It's something we started back in 2018 as a way to build bridges between law enforcement and the different communities we serve across New Jersey. When we were confronted with COVID-19, we felt it even more important to stay connected with the different communities that we serve to talk about issues of particular importance at this time. And so we shifted to this virtual format. This is our fourth virtual town hall. Next week, we'll be having our fifth to talk about resiliency. That'll be on May 28th at noon. And that'll be more of a quick hit lunch and learn, 30 minutes to talk about resiliency efforts and tools available to law enforcement officers and first responders at this incredibly difficult moment where they're facing such unique stresses in their day-to-day working environments. But today's topic is particularly important as well. Today, we're going to talk about fraud in the age of COVID-19. As much as this pandemic has brought out the best in so many of us, where we see neighbors taking care of neighbors, where we see friends checking in on others, and just lending people who need a hand, that extra hand up, it's also brought out the worst. We've seen some really unconscionable conduct in the wake of COVID-19, where unscrupulous people are trying to profit off the misery and suffering and fear of others. So we've assembled an incredible panel. This afternoon, you have the top federal law enforcement official in the state, U.S. Attorney Craig Carpenito. Not only that, he's leading Attorney General Barr's hoarding task force, which is across the United States task force to root out hoarding by those suppliers that have supplies of N95 and other PPE, but are keeping it from those who need it the most or charging exorbitant prices. We also have Chris Gramiccioni. Chris is the Monmouth County prosecutor. He's a chief law enforcement officer in his county, and he is really at the forefront on combating white-collar frauds and other types of crimes, and has a particular vantage point when it comes to the types of frauds that we're seeing, and we want to talk to him about his efforts, both on educating the public and rooting out these bad actors in his county and other parts of the state. Paul Rodriguez is the director of our Division of Consumer Affairs. He leads the state's consumer protection efforts. And when it comes to price gouging and other issues, it's Paul's shop that is battling those bad actors in this particular moment, as well as on all other days. And then finally, we have our insurance fraud prosecutor for the state of New Jersey, Tracy Thompson, because we are beginning to see COVID-19 related frauds creep into the insurance fraud space. And so we'll ask Tracy for her thoughts. But I want to start with our first guest this afternoon. That's U.S. Attorney Craig Carpenito. Craig, you have a unique vantage point as the top federal prosecutor, the top federal law enforcement official in this state, and as a member and actually the leader of the AG's hoarding task force. Can you tell us from your perspective, from both of those roles, what you're seeing going on right now in the wake of COVID-19 when it comes to frauds?
Thanks, Kabir. And I want to start by thanking you for your partnership on our state task force, along with Paul. It's very important, more important than ever, that we all work together to make sure that we protect a very vulnerable class of citizens, because what we've seen throughout our country's history, whenever we have a national crisis like this, or even a local one like Hurricane Sandy was, there's a dark underbelly of our society that instead of gelling, coming together, and working to help us all heal and make it through the crisis, they look inwards and they look as to how they can profit themselves and how they can take advantage of the situation. It's inevitable. It's always going to be there. So it's all about being diligent to avoid falling victim to those folks. What I tell everybody is the good thing is you're equipped with everything you need to avoid those sort of frauds if you're just aware and you use your most valuable asset, which is your common sense. And if something sounds too good to be true, or if something sounds like it is either a get-rich-quick scheme, or a single pill solution, or a magic bullet to kill this virus, you're probably dealing with somebody unscrupulous and somebody that you shouldn't trust. Because if those type of opportunities were out there, everybody would be taking those pills, everybody would be using that silver bullet, and everybody would be making money off of this thing. It's common sense is going to get you through it. Kabir, what we're seeing is what you and I talked about right out of the gates. When you have a situation where our frontline warriors against this virus are medical professionals and first responders, the first question that a profiteer is going to ask is, how can I insert myself into the marketplace and get in between what our most essential soldiers need and the supply chain for that? And that's what happened here. The ability to obtain the PPE, the personal protective equipment that these folks need, was something that was a commoditized product that I think a lot of people just took for granted. It was 50 cents, 60 cents for these masks, which filter out 95% of the particles that are dangerous to us and are really the only thing that have been approved to protect our medical professionals, which we're asking to interact directly with the virus every day. So you have conduct where folks have inserted themselves in the supply chain, diverted the product, so it's no longer going from the traditional supply chain directly to the end user without a markup, and they're marking up 500, 600, 700% in some cases. And when you talk about something going from I will give is that early on in the process, one of our investigations led us to a hospital which has come out and spoken. Oh, I get knocked off.
Yeah, I think you're back.
Okay, sorry. So, all right, I'm trying to get back on. I'm still okay. Am I back?
There you go. Yep.
Sorry.
We can
I
hear
don't
you.
know how far I got before you guys lost me, but
You're talking
what
about
we're
the
seeing.
hospital.
Okay, the hospital in Massachusetts, which spoke publicly about the attempt to gouge them. You're not talking about a difference between 50 cents and $7. What you're really talking about is a difference between a $300,000 purchase to protect the hospital for a 3 to 4 month period, becoming a $2.6 million purchase. And when you're talking about the number of hospital systems that you have within a state like Massachusetts and like we have in New Jersey, now you're talking about putting a strain on the public coffers that has a really big impact on state operations, which ultimately trickles down to the taxpayers. So we have the financial impact. The second thing that we're seeing, which I think is really the even more troublesome conduct, is we're seeing fraud in the representation of what the product is. The only reason why these masks are such a scarce and important commodity is because they actually filter particles and protect our medical workers, our first responders. What we're seeing is fraud in that area too. We're seeing misrepresentations as to whether or not counterfeiting, whether or not this is actual name brand product. We're seeing questions about misrepresentations about licensing, whether something is really FDA approved or NIOSH licensed. NIOSH is the licensing body that these masks go through to make sure that they are of the quality they say they are, so that our medical professionals use them. And then third, when we break through both of those two misrepresentations, get down to it, we use the FDA to test these materials, and we're finding that they filter at a far lower rate, some down in the 70 to 80% range, which my understanding from medical professionals is no different than you at home putting a piece of cloth over your face. Now, that is where the real danger lies, right? Because if someone is walking into a hospital and interacting with someone who has COVID intentionally, because they're trying to care for that individual and they believe they have an N95 mask on their face, when in fact what they have is no better than cutting up a shirt or a sock and putting it over your mouth. They're not really protected, and those are the sort of things that we're fighting and trying to root out with the hoarding and price gouging task force.
And before, I want to continue to set this table on sort of the fraud landscape, but before I move on to Prosecutor Gramiccioni, Attorney General Barr asked you to lead this nationwide task force to look at these issues. And so this is not just something you're seeing in New Jersey, where we're in really the ground zero for this pandemic. You're seeing this across the country, right?
Yeah, this is not a one state problem. This is a 50-state problem. We have 93 U.S. attorneys' offices. We have a representative of the task force in each of those 93 offices. We also have a representative in each of the main justice components, antitrust division, the Consumer Protection Bureau, et cetera. We're seeing approximately, we have open investigations in, I believe it's 61 of those 93 offices. We have about 350 open investigations going right now. And what we're seeing is, the major conduct is where you would expect it to be, because a lot of this stuff is coming from overseas and being imported, coming through channels outside of the U.S. So we're seeing major impacts in New Jersey, in the Eastern District of New York, mainly in Brooklyn, California, cities where we have ports, because a lot of this product is coming in through those ports. And we've seen this black market or gray market pop up with a network of brokers that did not exist prior to COVID-19. Prior to COVID-19, there were 6 main distributors of this material throughout the United States. The 6 main distributors have made representations that they are not raising their profit margins or their prices other than to account for increased costs.
Yep.
So the 6 major distributors are still operating traditional ways. What we're seeing, like I said, is this dark underbelly that tries to insert itself. And there's numerous different harms, the kinds we just talked about, the financial harm, the delay that it causes in the pipeline, and the fact that the product is not really what it's represented to be in a lot of cases.
Craig, thanks for that overview. You touched on the fact of our partnership in your opening comment. And that partnership, I think New Jersey, we're uniquely situated because our county partners, our state partners, and our federal partners work so well together when it comes to law enforcement issues. And I think part of it is the structure of the criminal justice system, but I think also a lot of it is the relationships. And Chris Gramiccioni, the Monmouth County prosecutor, I all share that bond of being from the District of New Jersey, from that U.S. Attorney's Office. And it's because of that, I think we're able to effectively serve and keep the residents of this state safe, even against frauds like the ones we're seeing now, because when that information comes to us and it's a federal issue, we're able to pass that information along to our federal partners and vice versa. And so now I want to talk to Chris about his perspective on what frauds he's seeing related to COVID-19 right now on the front lines there in Monmouth County.
Yeah, good afternoon, everyone. It's great to be here with you. General, what we're seeing, you're probably aware of this, but Monmouth County's 630,000 citizens, roughly 20% of them make up senior citizens. So a lot of the fraud scams that we're seeing going on during this pandemic relate to targeting the elderly community. And there's a reason for that. In our experience, and it's not scientific, but in our experience, the elderly generally have 3 common traits. They have means or funds that are saved up as a result of generally hard work and saving for retirement. They have a trust, a general trust that comes from a different generation of that I think is probably not something, these types of scams they saw back when they were younger, and that kind of tends to run them the risk of being victimized. And then they also they have the ability to, they have in most cases, they have limited experience in technology. And I'm certainly not trying to insult anyone in the elderly community. There are plenty that are much more capable than I am. But for the most part, there's those three combination of things create a good opportunity for a charlatan to take advantage of people, especially during the pandemic. The scams that we've seen that tend to target the elderly we posted on our webpage. A grandparent scam is a good example. Investment schemes, which I think Craig touched upon, surefire investments or once in a lifetime opportunities. The traditional email and phishing scams, which are common during normal times, but especially common now, where and then health insurance scams, where the idea is to try to steal someone's identity for purposes of, Medicare, Medicaid. And the one common thread amongst all of these fraud scams, and this applies to everybody, is the goal is to have the victim unwittingly provide what we collectively call personally identifiable information, or PII. And those are things like your date of birth, like your social security number, a checking or savings account number, a user ID or a password, or a Medicare, a credit card number, a Medicare ID number. These are ways that somebody can therefore steal your identity and go defraud the agencies or whatever governmental entities are supporting in that fashion. So that's kind of the common nexus for all of these frauds, regardless of pandemic time or not. And I guess my message for listeners and viewers would be cautious. Like, that's the goal for them to collect that. And if anybody is asking for it on, by internet or by the telephone, that should raise an immediate red flag, because nearly all the legitimate agencies, banks or otherwise, they're never going to ask you for that stuff over the phone or on an internet communication. And
Chris, you used a term, grandparent scams. We're familiar with it because this is a traditional scam that, I know when I was a line prosecutor at the U.S. Attorney's Office, we were dealing with these scams, but they've made a comeback, particularly in this situation and this environment that we find ourselves in right now. Can you just define or explain what a grandparent scam is in broad strokes?
It's generally where they contact someone in the senior citizen community, and they can find this information pretty easy because a lot of information's online. They'll call up and they'll pretend. They'll say, "Hey, grandma, grandpa, it's do you know who this is?" Or you'll say, "It's me," and then the grandparent will naturally say, "Chris, is it you, Chris?" "Yeah, it's me." And bear in mind that for every 100 of these, maybe 5 or 10 people fall for it, but that's the goal of a scammer. So what happens from there is the scammer immediately learns who the name of the grandchild, and then they go and they're frantic. It usually come late at night. They're tying it into the pandemic. They're saying, "I lost my job. I can't work because of COVID-19 and social distancing." And then what they'll do is they'll convince that person to wire them money or some kind of electronic transfer to get them funds. And at that point, the objectivity is lost by a grandparent who thinks they're talking to a loved one. And the first thing they want to do, like in most grandparents, they want to take care of the grandchild or the person that's in need in their family. And that's how it starts. And candidly, a lot of these scams, some of them are happening in the United States, but plenty of them are happening outside of our borders. And in many ways, at least from Monmouth County's perspective, it's incredibly difficult, if not impossible, for us to prosecute them. That even, coming from the U.S. attorneys, I'm sure Craig will agree, there's a lot of times where we don't have governmental treaties and agreements to be able to catch these people and ultimately extradite them too. So that's something to be wary of.
A lot of dead ends in those investigations. I'm going to come back, Chris, about what some of the steps you're taking to prevent these types of frauds, including educational efforts and your prosecution efforts. But before I do that, I want to turn to the insurance fraud prosecutor, Tracy Thompson. Tracy, before we talk about what you're seeing, can you just explain to folks what the insurance fraud prosecutor does, and then talk to us about some of the COVID-19 related frauds you're seeing from your vantage point?
Absolutely, General, and thank you for inviting me to be a part of this panel. Before I answer your question, I just want to thank my tremendous staff and office who's been doing an outstanding job. They have found an entirely new gear to do what we do, which is detect, investigate, prevent, prosecute insurance fraud, and also bring together all of the stakeholders and collaborate on addressing the issue of insurance fraud throughout the state of New Jersey. We handle and analyze all of the insurance fraud activities across the state, and hopefully we continue to help minimize the cost of insurance. Go ahead.
Yeah, if you could turn to some of what you're seeing right now in this landscape, Tracy, that'd be helpful.
Sure. So a lot of what Craig and Chris already said, but in addition to that, we're seeing vaccine schemes where people go into what purports to be a tent set up by a pharmacy. And if you pay in cash or give your Medicaid or your insurance information, you'll be given a test, a finger prick blood test, and then you get the results in 10 minutes. It's a fake piece of paper, it's a fake document, it's a fake test, but now they have your information by the time you realize that you've been scammed. Pharmacies are also continuing to bill in an effort to get their customers and clients their medicine. Sometimes what they do is bill in advance. And then when the person doesn't come and pick it up, sometimes they will keep it or sometimes they will return it, but not get a refund from Medicaid, return it to get money for themselves. And we've seen that in the past, and we have no doubt we will continue to see it. Although we have not received many COVID-19 related cases, we anticipate that we will be seeing an uptick, especially in the telehealth arena, workers' comp, even in the automobile industry, life insurance with fake deaths. But these are all things that take a little bit to percolate in the system.
Thanks, Tracy, for that overview and for explaining to the broader public what the insurance fraud prosecutor does. I'm going to come back to you about some of the efforts that you've taken in your office to root out these frauds. But before we do that part of our conversation, let's hear from Paul Rodriguez, the director of our Division of Consumer Affairs. Paul, can you tell us, DCA touches COVID-19 in a lot of different ways. Today, you're expanding testing through administrative orders at pharmacies for COVID-19. You're relaxing rules for licensed professionals to more easily be admitted to practice in this state from out of state, and extraordinary steps to increase the number of resources available to our hospitals. But you also have the consumer protection hat that you wear. And so can you just give us your insight as to what's going on across the state when it comes to consumer frauds related to COVID-19?
Absolutely. Absolutely. First of all, thank you very much for inviting me to participate in this panel. Thank you for your leadership, General, and to all our panelists, and for the collaboration of everyone on this panel. I will say that, as the U.S. Attorney noted, in times of crisis, people here in the state of New Jersey have a way of coming together that has really been extraordinary in this crisis as in previous crises. Unfortunately, we have people, again, as the U.S. Attorney noted, that seek to take advantage of crises like this. They seek to be, to be opportunistic, and so we see that in many different fields and many different realms. So we are seeing, we talked a little bit about price gouging in PPE earlier. And that was specifically with regard to healthcare professionals and in facilities. But we're seeing that opportunistic behavior on the part of retailers as well. And so we have gotten a very large number of complaints as people go to their stores and they're looking to stock up. They're looking to protect themselves by purchasing PPE for themselves, purchasing disinfectants, just buying food and being able to stock up for a time that they want to shelter in place at home. And we've seen a large number of complaints about prices going up starkly during this time. And so we have been very active in cracking down against those retailers, reaching out to them, letting them know that that's not appropriate. As you know, we've been investigating, we've been sending out subpoenas and sending out inspectors and investigators. We are lucky in the state of New Jersey. We have a law that prevents an increase in prices during a declared state of emergency. And so that gives us a tool by which we can combat such price gouging. But it's not just the price gouging. So we're seeing opportunists across the board. So you're seeing opportunists, for example, in trying to sell fake items, making false and misleading claims about tests that may be available, whether or not they're authorized or whether they're available to the public. We've seen people selling dangerous cleaning supplies, where they've essentially home mixed chemicals that are for commercial use and trying to sell it to consumers without informing them that they're dangerous. We've seen questions about false and misleading claims about cleaning supplies, saying that they're 99.9% effective against the virus that causes COVID-19. We've also seen false and misleading claims against about treatments or cures. We're also seeing, as the prosecutor noted, we're seeing a large number of scams. What are maybe oldies but goodies. These are scammers. They follow the news, and so these are typical scams that we saw prior to this crisis. The prosecutor mentioned the grandparent scam. We also just general phishing scams that are out there to try to get your personal information, but they put a twist, a COVID twist on them. They might be, for example, someone claiming that rather than, we used to get grandparent scams claiming that I got arrested, I need help, will you bail me out? Now it's, I'm in quarantine and I need to buy supplies. Can you send me information? Or it used to be that you might get a call, an unsolicited call, text, or email from the Social Security Administration saying, someone claiming to be from the Social Security Administration claiming that your Social Security number was expiring or being rescinded, or from the IRS saying that you owe back taxes and trying to get you off balance so that you're scared and so that you can try to resolve the situation as quickly as possible, even if that's giving your personal information, making some sort of payment right away. We're now getting that in the context of somebody purporting to be from a unemployment office. Some are purporting to be from the federal government wanting to give you a stimulus check, or a public health agency saying we need to get your information to do some sort of mandatory test. And so those sorts of scams they're old scams that have been adapted to this new environment. We're also seeing, likewise, whenever there's any crisis, whenever there's a natural disaster, or in this case a healthcare crisis, we see charities that come out to solicit money, many very appropriately so. But of course, we have people who try to take advantage of the situation, try to solicit funds for an organization that may not exist. And here, in the Division of Consumer Affairs, we regulate charities as well. Charities have to register with us, and so we encourage people to check before they donate. We also regulate the securities industry in the state, and as the prosecutor noted, we're also seeing investment scams. People saying, get in on the ground floor. There's a penny stock that will, this is, we are offering securities in the test that is going to be rolled out across the country, or the company that has developed the first vaccine. Again, these are classic scams, just adapted to the new situation.
Clearly, there's no shortage of ways. Paul, clearly there's no shortage of ways in which bad actors are trying to profit off the current environment and people's circumstances and the fears that people are experiencing right now. And I want to talk to the U.S. Attorney about some of the enforcement efforts. But before I go back to U.S. Attorney Carpenito, we hear this term all the time, and you touched on it at the beginning of your remarks about price gouging. What does that mean in the state of New Jersey technically, and what does price gouging enforcement look like? And if you could just briefly touch on that, and then I want to go back to the U.S. Attorney.
Absolutely. So in New Jersey, as I mentioned, we're lucky to have this codifying law. So in New Jersey, price gouging is, once a state of emergency is declared in the state, it is illegal to raise your prices more than 10% for the entirety of that state of emergency, and even for 30 days beyond. So that means that during the state of emergency, you cannot raise your prices more than may be required due to increase in supply chain costs, but you cannot raise your prices on anything. So that's not limited to just PPE. That's not limited to just disinfectant supplies. It applies to both goods and services. So that's going to be food, hotel rooms, anything that may that may go up during this time. And the former Attorney General had a great quote about this. They say this is a time in which the law of supply and demand runs into the law of consumer protection. Obviously as things get into short supply, sometimes people want to take advantage of it, but who are selling them. But this is a time in which our state is meant to come together. So as a result, if you see anyone that's raising those prices, they are subjecting themselves to a civil fine and penalty of up to $10,000 per occurrence. And if they're a subsequent violator, that's $20,000.
Thanks, Paul. And we've seen, I think, well over 4,000 price gouging complaints touching over 2,500 unique businesses. The good news, if there's any in any of that, is that the majority of times where we've gone in to look at this, it has been businesses passing on increase in supplier costs, but there have been bad businesses, and we'll go after them and hold them accountable because, again, we'd have zero tolerance for those who profit off the fear and need of others. So on that note, I want to circle back to U.S. Attorney Carpenito. Craig, we've sort of seen the spectrum of scams that are out there, and we've talked about the fraud in the representations as to the type of goods, the quality of goods, the hoarding side of this. We've talked about the bad testing out there, the miracle cures. Can you touch on briefly some of the steps that you're taking right now to protect New Jerseyans and frankly all Americans in your role as the head of the AG's Hoarding Task Force?
Yeah, I mean, look, one of the good things here is that we have a tremendous amount of experienced prosecutors and experienced investigators with the FBI, with DEA when it comes to certain of the drug aspects, the folks we work with, the Postal Inspection Service. And we had actually just at the beginning of the year started a new government fraud unit, which is something that has been very busy working on these investigations. As you know from your position as AG Gerbere and from your former position in our office, it's tough to talk about specific cases. But what we are doing is we have a national hotline that is run out of Louisiana that is there for disaster fraud. There's a link to that on our website, the New Jersey U.S. Attorney's Office website, and we're taking in complaints. And as you know, as part of our partnership, we've been sending a lot of those complaints your way through Executive Assistant Attorney General Andrew Brock. What we do is every day we go through those complaints, filter them, and we're very good at this point about this from a systems perspective about taking all of the complaints and cross-referencing them and seeing where we see commonalities to try and find the worst actors. Obviously, we have a lot of cyber threats out there, so we're monitoring cyber. Education's a big part of it. I've been out there talking to folks, and I've been out there in the news a little bit. I'm not usually somebody who jumps out in front of a camera, but it's important for people to talk about this stuff. I think the first thing is what Chris and Paul, Gerbere and Tracy have all said, which is being alert and attuned to the fact that now is a time to ask more questions. It's a time to look at everything with a more suspect eye, because fear is, one of the richest petri dishes for the disease of fraud. And there are folks that are very experienced in working in that pool. We brought a case, US v. Eric Santos. It was the first COVID-related fraud case announced in the country out of the District of New Jersey. It was someone that, we allege has been involved in numerous different billing schemes of Medicare fraud. And we were in an active investigation of that individual, and as described in the complaint, happened to be in a situation where we were able to record the individual because of the prior cases we had going. And almost immediately, as soon as COVID-19 took off, on those recordings, recordings, he started saying, we can hide under our beds and cower and let the disease beat us like everyone else, or we can get out there and we can chase the COVID dollar bird, I believe was the quote, and we can get rich during this time when everybody else is coiled back and hiding. I think it's a really poignant moment where we happen to be in a situation where we're able to catch someone in real time having these conversations. Those conversations are going on throughout the country. The traditional fraudsters that we have all seen in our roles, the 5 speakers on this panel, immediately pivoted to how can they take advantage of COVID-19. No surprise there. So we're out there using our traditional means. We're using undercovers, we're using informants, we're using the ability to wiretap, we're using recordings. We are relentlessly chasing this thing, not just in New Jersey, but throughout the country. And partnership, a word you used early on. This is the kind of battle that you cannot win on your own. Sharing information is always critical to law enforcement. It's something that we have done at an incredibly successful clip the past 3 years in New Jersey. We've seen it in our violent crime initiatives for years, that we've partnered on. Chris has been great partnering with us down in Monmouth County, providing assistance there. It's the same tools that we're using, partnership and the sharing of information. One of the ways that we can defeat this thing is if whatever we see, we're talking to the AG's office, Monmouth County Prosecutor's Office, the Consumer Frauds Bureau, everybody on this chain, so that we triangulate the information and get to the source the quickest. And the other thing is really standing down and not having ego about where these cases are prosecuted. That is a much more valuable tool, I think, than people realize. Because when we get the proper venue, for example, Paul, for a lot of these price gouging cases, is going to be the best place for us to go. He has a very clear statute, it has a very clear threshold. 10% is nothing compared to what we're seeing out in the market, and sending those cases his way is going to be an important tool that I use, both as U.S. Attorney and as the head of the task force with these states, to getting these folks really named and shamed. I think that's part of the biggest tool that we could use right now, is to out these people as shameless profiteers that are frankly involved in the most un-American conduct that I've known in my lifetime.
Correct. Thank you not only for your leadership on this issue, but from day one at the U.S. Attorney's Office, because I think, again, you hit the point in your comments just now. It is that relationship, and it's that relationship that you've been pushing and trying to foster between all law enforcement agencies in this state, county, federal, when it comes to violent crimes, when it comes to drug crimes, when it comes to gun violence, when it comes now to COVID-19. And it's because of those relationships we can have that seamless information sharing and make sure that we're holding people accountable in the most appropriate venue possible. And so I want to thank you for your leadership and your efforts on the national front too here in helping keep everyone safe at this difficult time and holding these bad actors accountable through your enforcement actions. If I could ask you one last thing, if folks are seeing some of this conduct or think they know of somebody who's engaged in hoarding or unscrupulous behaviors such as that, should they reach out to that disaster hotline that you mentioned on your website?
Yeah, absolutely. So the disaster hotline is a national effort, and although it is run by the federal government, it is shared entirely with the state AG's network and local prosecutors. What we do every day is we have a team of agents that are sitting in New Jersey. I've been blessed to have a number of federal agencies second to me, full-time agents. They go through those sheets, and all they do is sort it to figure out the best venue. And what we then do is we share it with the state unfiltered. That way, when the state AG's office takes a look at it, they're seeing the same data we are. We're not holding anything back. That way, if there's a conversation to be had between myself, Kabir, Paul, Chris, Tracy, whoever it may be, to say, hey, this is a case we really think that we should take the lead on, it's there and they have it. We are working to have full transparency in those complaints. And what I can tell you is if your complaint goes through that hotline, there's no possibility it's going to slip through the cracks. every one of those complaints is being looked at.
Thanks, Craig. Well, let me pivot to Chris and talk about either enforcement efforts, Chris, that are underway at the county level, or steps that you're taking from your position to make sure that we could prevent some of these frauds, and maybe talk about some of the things that residents can do to protect themselves, because sometimes once that money's left the bank account, as you talked about earlier, when we have overseas actors, when our subpoenas don't come back, or where we don't have the ability to claw back money, it's really hard. So a lot of this has to be done on the front end to protect ourselves from being victimized in the first place. So if you could talk about some of those issues, I'm sure our listeners and our viewers would appreciate it.
Sure. Thank you, General. So in my job, in our job, it feels like you can divide it into reactive work, which a lot of the public understands, responding to crime when somebody calls a police department or a prosecutor's office and says, hey, I've been victimized. But a little, the other part of the job that's equally, if not more so important, is proactive messaging to the people that live in our jurisdictions and communities. And that's kind of what we've done during this pandemic. We took the same playbook that we did following Superstorm Sandy to really blast that information, knowledge being power, to educate the public about a lot of these different scams. And you mentioned the grandparent scam, this one that we've put up. If you follow Monmouth County on Facebook and Twitter, we often do this, not just during the pandemic, but in regular normal operations as well. So we really take that educating the public seriously, because the goal is to have potential victims be hard targets, right? Craig mentioned earlier, you mentioned, General, the goal, the common theme, common thread is to try to get personally identifiable information. That's what drives a fraud, is the ability to take that private information and be able to defraud you and get some kind of an unjust or unfair illegal enrichment. That's social security numbers, bank checking account, the traditional things, dates of birth, where they can go to steal your identity, your Medicare ID. And then what we do is we arm all of our police departments with this as well, not just the public, but we ask the police departments to be aware of these scams, to be aware of the telltale signs, to blast out to their local constituencies. And because in New Jersey, one of the blessings and the curse is the concept of home rule. In one way, it's great that we have a lot of police, fire, and EMS, but in another way, sometimes messaging can be difficult because of the layers of government. So that's an important piece that I think all of us prosecutors do. As far as the part about what we're doing, we're trying, like the U.S. Attorney pointed out, to be proactive in our enforcement. And there's a number of investigative techniques that we routinely undertake, which we don't generally disclose to the public, but suffice it today to say, anybody who's interested or considering this type of criminal activity should know that we have detection methods in place to try to make your lives difficult. But I think, General, the most important thing is for citizens and people to make themselves hard targets. And the way to do that is to be ultra protective of this personally identifiable information. Make that extra phone call, call the bank, don't just respond on a computer or a telephone call. Break that call. If it's a family scam, call somebody in the family. Just be cautious and vigilant.
Yeah, to your last point, I mean, I think when I look at sort of defensive tactics against these types of fraudsters, one of the things, even with the grandparent scams, when I was a county prosecutor, when I would go talk to senior citizens or to about elder fraud and raise these issues, I would just say, hey, if you think it's your grandson, ask another question. Ask about his sibling, or ask about a family pet, or just ask something to put that fraudster on the defensive, because I think 9 times out of 10 that pushes that fraudster away. And I think that's a pretty good tactic to keep in mind. Just ask it, like you mentioned, reach out to another family member before you wire some money. And I think those types of steps can go a long way here and prevent you from being victimized in the first place.
Right. The fraudsters are looking for the soft target. If you would all make them difficult, in most cases, people in our county report that they just hang up.
And going back to some of what the U.S. Attorney was talking about earlier about the different schemes out there, one of the fears that I have, and I know that Craig shares, is as recovery monies begin to flow in, and we saw this with Sandy, there's going to be a whole host of fraudsters out there who are going to try to take advantage of that. And even as as stimulus checks or other monies are coming in the mail, people are not going to ask you for your social security number over the phone or for your bank account information over the phone for you to get these federal relief funds. Isn't that right, Craig?
That's absolutely right. I mean, look, if there's one certainty that we have along with all of this is that folks are going to take advantage of those programs. And, I've gotten that phone call as well. I was in my first year in the office when my wife called me in a panic that the IRS was going to take action with us, and they wanted her date of birth, her social security number, and they wanted our B of A bank account number. Thank God she didn't know that by heart, because she gave them her date of birth and her social before calling me in a panic, which led to my having an old friend of Kabir, Chris, and mine, Tom Mahoney, call the number back and investigate. But I had a very difficult conversation at home that night about the fact that the IRS does not call people and ask for their personal information over the phone. Neither do any of the administrators of these programs. If you are not directed to a secure website, you are not dealing with someone that you should be dealing with, and even then you should be asking very difficult questions. Kabir's advice is very good. Fraudsters do not like inquisitive minds. So the more that you push them, and it's as simple sometimes as saying, why don't you just give me a phone number and I'll call you back when my spouse gets home, or after I talk to my lawyer, or hey, I'm just busy right now. Can I call you in a half hour? Why don't you give me a number to reach you at? That is one of the surefire ways that you can root out a lot of evil.
Thanks, Craig. Those are real practical suggestions, and hopefully people take them away and share them with their family members and loved ones, because this is happening as we speak all across the state. It's a present law enforcement problem, not just in Monmouth, but nearly in all 21 of our counties. So really be on the lookout of these simple grandparent scams, and the simple techniques that we've shared can help prevent a loved one from losing, in some cases, their life savings. I want to continue on the theme of talking about our older population in this state. Right now, the isolation that we need to fight back COVID-19 and beat back this pandemic is also leading to a perfect environment for those who might take advantage of others or abuse others. We are fearful that domestic violence is on the rise right now, but so too maybe elder abuse, because we know that our elder population sometimes gets taken advantage of in circumstances like these, where people are isolated and not connected. So Tracy, are you seeing an uptick in elder abuse allegations? And if so, what sort of outreach are you doing to address this horrific topic, which you play a central role in combating as the insurance fraud prosecutor?
General, ironically, we have not seen an uptick in reported elder abuse, but that may be because the people who would ordinarily report it are not around the senior citizens and our elderly population to tell us, right? So family members aren't allowed to go into the nursing homes to visit and check on their family members. They would be the first ones to see signs of bruising, or to check their financial accounts to see if money was missing from the account at the long-term care facility. For our senior citizens who are sheltered in place and alone, their caregiver may not be coming over as usual, or the caregiver could have, and we've seen these cases, have been the person who is committing the elder abuse. What we are suggesting to attorneys and to accountants who have senior clients is, just like I did, call and check on every member of your staff, or every member, every client that you have in this situation, to see, have you given out, have you changed your will, and changed the beneficiary, to help them not be so isolated, and to give them encouragement. Go through your family's phone number index and call your family members that you haven't spoken to in a while, just to check on them, so that even though we're socially distant, we don't have to disengage. We can engage even more.
Great. Thank you for those tips, Tracy. We're nearing the end of our time, and I've been trying to incorporate some of the questions that we're getting in online as we go. And I'm going to try to hit one or two more. But before I get to more public questions, I just want Paul to speak to some of what he's seeing from an enforcement perspective and some tips that he might have for our listeners to protect themselves in this environment.
Sure. So I think my tips would be the same as we've heard so far on the panel. I think one of the most important tools that consumers have to protect themselves is knowledge about the types of scams that are out there and what their rights are. And that's why, obviously, we are very active and aggressive right now. And I do want to thank our staff for being so active and aggressive on the enforcement standpoint. We are actively investigating the tips that come into our office, either directly or through the state and federal task force. But we are also, in addition to that, it's important for us to get information out and to get education out to consumers. One of the things that we hear over and over again is that consumers who are maybe similarly situated, otherwise in the same position, but one person is less likely to come and fall victim to a scam if they've heard about something like that before, and then know to ask questions, know not to act right away. I mentioned before, you asked about tips. I mentioned before, one of the things that scammers try to do, not only do they follow the headlines to try to get something that may sound plausible, something you've heard of, but what they really try to do is throw you off balance. They want to scare you so that your defenses are low, and you just want to find a solution to make them go away, whether that be turning over your bank account information, whether it be sending them some sort of money. So what we say is, if you are one of the biggest red flags and one of the things to protect yourself, not only should you follow follow the social media feeds, follow the advice that's coming out collectively from our offices, but if you are experiencing any sort of pressure to turn over information, that is an immediate red flag. Stop, find out, take a step back, find a way to contact them again, and take some time to think about it. And that's across the spectrum. So that's whether you're getting an unsolicited phone call, whether you're getting an unsolicited email, or whether we see it even in the charitable space where someone's saying, "We need this money right now. We'll come and pick up a check." Another scam is anybody who's asking you not only to turn over personal information, but anyone who's asking you to make some sort of immediate payment, especially if it's through some sort of unusual mechanism like a gift card or a wire transfer. We're seeing a lot of scams with regard to just false information out there too, and so we really do want to stress that you should, if you're getting information, if people are claiming to provide some sort of cures or treatments, go to a trusted source of information. And likewise, when someone's contacting you by phone, email, or text, if they claim to be from a bank, a government agency, rather than turn over that information or even purchasing something from an unsolicited email, go directly to the source, go yourself to their website, call them directly before you turn over any information.
Great tips, Paul. I'm going to do a rapid fire. I'm going to throw out these questions to each of you and then give you also 30 seconds to answer and share some last thoughts. I'll read out the final questions first, and then we'll go around the horn. This is going to be to the U.S. Attorney. Can you describe the criminal statute that applies to hoarding to the county prosecutor, Chris Comiccione? I've heard about a Facebook fraud called Find Your Superhero Name, where you end up revealing your birth date, possibly your first pet, common pieces of information. Are you seeing that in your county, or is that one of the frauds that you're seeing? To the insurance fraud prosecutor, or actually to Paul, says the New Jersey law against price increases mean that needed merchandise may get diverted to other states where merchants may gouge more easily. And then are you seeing in the insurance fraud space people billing for services that aren't being rendered because doctors' offices are closed? So I throw that out to the group to also allow you to share some final thoughts. Craig?
Yeah, so hoarding and price gouging is not something that was specifically addressed by federal statute prior to the invocation of the Defense Production Act of 1950 by the president at the end of March. What the statute essentially says in a nutshell is that anything that has been delineated a scarce material by the Department of Health and Human Services is illegal to be hoarded, held onto, or accumulated by a person with the intent to profiteer illegally, to essentially price gouge. That list of scarce materials was issued by the Department of Health and Human Services on March 27th at 11:15 a.m. It covers the PPE that we've been talking about, the masks, ventilators, things, hydrochloroquine, medication, etc., medical gowns, all the things that are needed by our medical professionals to fight this war. So if you accumulate those products after the invocation on March 23rd and do so with the intent to price gouge, which is selling above the pre-COVID prevailing market prices, you are subject to liability under federal statute.
Any final thoughts, Craig, as we wrap up?
No, what I did do is I sent Whitney Lewis a link to the Department of Justice Disaster Fraud Hotline. She's included it in the chat here. That's the hotline we discussed. And, for those of you out there who are trying to navigate this thing, I think you got a lot of good advice today from 5 people who've seen a lot throughout their careers. And I just want to finish up where I started, which is, remember, the most important asset you have throughout life, and certainly when it comes to dealing with folks who are trying to take advantage of you, is your common sense. All the things that you need, all the tools that you need to protect yourself, you have and you were raised with. It's just being on guard and understanding that not everyone is here to help you. That's hard to always keep in mind when they're in the middle of a crisis where most people just want to come together and protect each other and help heal. There are some folks that will try to take advantage.
Craig, thank you for that advice. Thank you for your leadership, and thank you for all that you're doing right now to keep all New Jerseyans safe at this difficult moment. Let me go to Chris. There was a question about a Facebook fraud. My guess is that this is just a variation of the traditional frauds we're seeing that you talked about.
Yeah, it could be, or it might not be a fraud, but the important thing is you're giving out one of a varied group of personally identifiable information, your birth date. A lot of organizations will have 2 or sometimes 3-factor authentication. So even if that's an innocent game on Facebook, you've already given out one of the sensitive bits of information that it only take another 1 or 2 for a criminal to be able to take action and defraud you on that. So I personally would stay away from that stuff. Whether it's I have not personally seen a fraud scam related to the one that's described, but we'll share that with our intelligence bureau and just make sure that that's blasted out to our law enforcement partners in the county.
I mean, just simple stuff. Don't share your social security number. Don't share that sort of information on the phone, online, on social media. Just guard it. And if a bank truly needs it, I mean, go in person and give that type of information. And I guess that's easier said in normal times, but just an extra measure of precaution, common sense, like Craig talked about, will save a lot of people a lot of heartache in the long run. Chris, thank you for participating. Thank you for your time. Thank you for all that you're doing for the state and for the residents of Monmouth County. We really appreciate your service. With that, let me kick it to Tracy. There was a question about medical facilities. Are you seeing them billing for services not rendered during the period of the lockdown, or is that something you're going to look towards?
General, that is something that we anticipate seeing, especially in this climate of increased telehealth services. So what we are recommending is that the insureds, they just take 10 seconds, right, to write down the date, time of their call, the length of the call, what they discussed with the doctor. If they can't do that, get somebody on the phone to listen in, so that there is somebody to verify what went on and what the condition was and how long the call was and who you spoke to. And that way we will have a record. Our first line of defense will be insurance companies who are looking for these billing irregularities, especially if there is durable medical equipment associated with a mental health call, let's say, right? Those two things don't go together. My best advice would be, again, to take notes and then compare that to your explanation of benefits. Because even though you're not paying for it, we as a society are paying for it when there's fraud in the healthcare billing. My tip would be, and no one has said it yet, before you get to hanging up the phone, don't answer calls with unfamiliar numbers. Nothing will happen if you don't answer the phone. It will leave a message, and if it's somebody you know, then you'll know who to call back. But if you don't recognize the number, be patient and just let them leave a message. They probably won't call back.
Common sense, common sense, common sense. Thanks, Tracy, for your persistence and for everything that you're doing at the Insurance Fraud Prosecutor's Office. With that, Paul, final words. Will the enforcement of our state's price gouging laws cause suppliers to take their goods elsewhere or retailers to take their goods elsewhere? Is that a real concern?
We certainly haven't seen that. I will say that there's a reason that we have a price gouging law in place, and it's to protect consumers at a time in which there's a natural tendency to take advantage and to raise, to try to raise your profit margins where you can. We're also trying to protect the consumers to make sure that they have the resources that are available to them. We have, to the extent that there's been cyclical shortages or cyclical reductions in the availability of supply throughout this crisis, we haven't heard reports, we haven't seen evidence that it's disproportionate in New Jersey or other states that have price gouging laws as opposed to anywhere else. To the extent that there's been those cyclical reductions in availability, they've largely been nationwide. Certainly, if we're hearing that, it's something that we'd like to know about. But again, these laws are in place in order to protect and ensure the availability of supplies and make sure that people aren't taken advantage of when they need these supplies the most. The other thing that I'll say, in closing, for myself, I want to thank all the panelists and for your partnership in this. But I also want to say that I want to thank the public and the listeners for their partnership, and say that partnership is just as important. For us as an enforcement agency, it is so important that we hear from you. So if you are seeing something, if you're seeing a business that's trying to take advantage of a consumer, we want to know about it. And so through the mechanisms that we've already discussed, one of our biggest tips is know that we are here, know that you can file a complaint, and that complaint should have as much detail as possible. You can take screenshots, you can take photos, and please, we want to hear that.
And that's a great segue into some of the other questions that I'm seeing coming in on how to report. A lot of the web pages that you just described, the DCA portal, that has ways to report price gouging, but certainly the hotline that the U.S. Attorney described is a point of entry into the reporting system as well. So we would direct you there. That information is on in the handouts that you'll see to the side of your screen. You could take advantage of it there and report to us information that you might have. And as Craig mentioned at the outset, it will get to the appropriate authority to be investigated and followed up on and prosecuted, whether criminally or civilly, as the case may be. There's been also some requests for information about pushing this information out on social media. That's something that we all do from time to time, and we will certainly do it as a wrap up from this particular virtual town hall and to push that information out. The goal of this session and all of these sessions is to give you information to better protect yourselves, to bring you into closer contact with law enforcement. Today, you've had the benefit of the highest levels of law enforcement from the federal level to the state level to the county level on this virtual town hall. We hope that you found it informative. And to the extent there were specific questions about specific cases that weren't followed up on, we'll pass those questions on to the appropriate person, whether it's the U.S. Attorney, the county prosecutor, Division of Consumer Affairs, or the Insurance Fraud Prosecutor, and we will get back to you and address your concerns and your your questions. So again, I want to thank you. We went a little bit over our allotted time. We wanted to make this a 1-hour session, but we're new to this virtual environment. We're getting better at it, and we'll speak to you at our next town hall next week on resiliency. Thank you, everyone, for participating.